Hello, and welcome back to Reunited States, the show where we tackle tough topics in U.S. politics in an effort to promote rational and civil discourse. A big thank you to everyone who has watched, subscribed, and supported our podcast so far. Your engagement and comments are what motivate us to continue making this show. And with that, from Los Angeles, California, my name is Tyler Ehrig.
And from Manchester, New Hampshire, my name is Jesse Saywell.
And today we're talking about a very nerdy subject and something very near and dear to Jesse's heart, political polling. Why does it matter? What does it mean? How can we influence it? And most importantly, how do we talk about it?
Yes, you are correct that I do care about polling. I am always a numbers guy when it comes to politics. And I think that there has been this narrative, especially in the aftermath of the 2016 election, which shocked so many people, that polling is inaccurate, that it's wrong, that it's not correct, that it can't be predicted, that it can't show any sort of accurate depiction of where the country is.
Can you remind us a bit about what polling looked like in 2016 and why it was such a surprise when the results came out?
So the polling looked relatively consistent for Secretary Clinton, Hillary Clinton, in favor of her amongst a number of key states throughout the country. And certainly in the national polls, she had a 4 or 5% lead in terms of national polling. Now, national polling is largely worthless when we talk about the presidential race. That's the thing that I think really throws people off, is that national polling tends to be some of the most accurate. You tend to get some of the most accurate trends in terms of what is the popular vote going to look like. The problem with that is the popular vote is not how we elect our presidents in this country. We elect our presidents through the Electoral College. And we can go in on a different episode into the history of the Electoral College and slavery and the creation of the U.S. Constitution and all the bargains that were made there and why we have the Electoral College. That's a whole nother subject. But we do. And for the time being, that is why it is the Harris campaign is spending millions of dollars on an Omaha district that gives out one singular electoral vote, whereas, there are millions of Republicans in California whose votes in the presidential election do not really matter because they're outvoted. There are millions of Democrats in Texas who, at least historically, their votes at the presidential level have not, in recent years, been as valuable. What we're looking at is a key set of swing states, and I think most people kind of have a general sense of what those states are. If you look in the Rust Belt, you look at Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. You look in the Sun Belt, you have North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada. Those are basically the states. That's the key to the White House. Who can win enough electoral votes out of those states to get over 270? And so going into 2016, I remember I was working for a company that did donor outreach for the I'm With Her for the Hillary Clinton campaign, or Hillary for America campaign. And I remember talking to people who said, Hillary's got it in the bag, I'm not giving money. It's kind of a similar way. This is why I think this is an important subject. It's a similar vibe to the way I feel people have or feel right now. There is a sense of complacency and a sense of disbelief that Donald Trump could ever win the presidency again. In the same way that in 2016, there was a sense of disbelief that he could ever win in the first place. And I'm here to tell you, I'm sorry to say it, but if the election was held right now, there's a very good chance, if not a likely chance, that Donald Trump is the next president of the United States come January 20th of next year. And you know me, people who are listening know me, I don't want that. I'm terrified of that, and so I'm trying to combat the complacency. And if you look at the state polls in 2016, what really threw people off was state polls were wrong by several points in a way that they haven't been before. And that is true. It is fair to say that the state polls were wrong by roughly 4 to 5 percentage points, which is a large number. That's outside the margin of error in terms of the actual results, because because of the Trump effect. There is a Trump effect that has been very clear over the last couple of years, and now we have enough data to say that this is how this works. In 2016 and 2020, Donald Trump outperformed in state polls by anywhere from 2% to 5% on average. Somewhere in there, he outperformed what the polls were saying, the averages of polls. Now, we're not talking about one specific poll. That should be clear. We're talking about, if you go on to Real Clear Politics, they'll give you an average of the polls. And that's really how you track what's going on. You never look at one individual poll. You look at the averages of all of the polls to see, is the candidate going up or is the candidate going down? And right now we're in a razor-tight race. I mean, if you look at the states that if Kamala Harris is leading, in most of these states it's by less than a point in the averages. If Donald Trump is leading, in most of the states it's by less than a point to 2 points in the averages. So that's pretty consistent across the board. The problem is with the Trump effect, if you factor that in, that probably means that Kamala Harris is down by several percentage points in most of these states. And it was true in 2020 as well. So people say, okay, we're talking about 8 years ago. Okay, let's talk about 2020. Kamala Harris is well behind where Joe Biden was in 2020. Right now in Pennsylvania, for example, which is the state that is most critical for her to win an election to the White House. It'd be very, very difficult for Kamala Harris to become the next president of the United States if she does not win the state of Pennsylvania just based on the electoral votes. She currently has in the averages a 0.6 RCP average lead over Donald Trump. And that's coming up with polls dating back to September 11th to September 16th. So that's an average of recent polls. On this date, 4 years ago, September 25th, 2020, Joe Biden was up by an average of 4.3% in the polls. Joe Biden won the election by 1.2%. So again, he underperformed where he was in terms of polling numbers in Pennsylvania. Let's just go to Wisconsin. Wisconsin was one of the bigger ones. Harris has a exactly 1 point lead in the average of polls right now. On this date 4 years ago, Joe Biden had a 6.6% lead. You want to know how much he won by? He won by 0.7 percentage points. He was almost 6 points underneath what the polling was saying. Now, people again are saying, this is wrong. This is what we say. Polls are wrong. No, the national polls are correct. The state polls underestimate Trump because there's a certain faction of people that vote for Trump who otherwise potentially would not vote. If you look at traditional polling on off years, so we're talking about 2018, 2022, and off-year elections in which Trump is not on the ballot, Democrats actually are outperforming by roughly 1 to 2 points, upwards to potentially 4 points in some areas. But it's always within a relatively small number of points in the grand scheme of things. And this is why I'm concerned, because again, Biden was up significantly more against Trump 4 years ago. We're in the heart of the pandemic. There's a lot of dissatisfaction with Trump. There's dissatisfaction with the economy at that point in time. And Biden was ahead, and he still barely won because of the Trump effect, because there are voters that come out who do not otherwise come out. And if you look at all the states right now, Harris is up 1.8 in Michigan. Harris is up by 0.4 in Nevada. Trump is up by 2.2 in Arizona. Trump is up by 0.7 in North Carolina. If he wins some of these states, and if he takes a state like Pennsylvania, he is the next president of the United States. It's very clear. If the trends are correct in stating that there's going to be an underestimation of Trump support by roughly 2 to 4 percentage points, he's going to win all of these states. Now, do I think that's what's actually going to happen? No. But do I think that right now there's a kind of a feeling amongst people that Harris has to be doing better than Biden was a few years ago, that somehow, I mean, I think you said it recently. You asked, how is Kamala Harris running behind where Joe Biden was? She's running significantly behind where he was, and she's also running significantly behind other Democrats. If you look at the Senate candidates in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in Wisconsin, in Arizona, in Nevada, she's running behind all of them by significant numbers, whereas in 2020, it was the reverse. Biden was outperforming all of these Senate Democrats because Senate Democrats were more associated with a radical left-wing agenda. There was a belief there was the defund the police movement that was going, that slogan was being used. It scared a lot of people off. Lost Democrats Senate races in North Carolina and Maine that they could have won. There was talk about ending the filibuster. Right now, what that tells me is the general electorate sees Kamala Harris as less electable than the average Senate Democrat, than the average kind of run-of-the-mill Democrat, which is popular and are leading in many polls. Kamala Harris is running behind them. And so what polling does and why it's important is we need to know what we have to work on. And the biggest thing, straight up, right now, the biggest thing that Kamala Harris has to figure out how to do is to appeal to men. In the same way that the Trump campaign, if they were wise, would be trying desperately to appeal to women, the gender gap right now is huge. It is the largest gender gap in recorded history. We're talking about close to 60% of women saying that they're going to support Kamala Harris, and then under 40% of men saying that they're going to support Kamala Harris. That's a huge gap, and it is larger than Biden, it's larger than Hillary in 2016, and it's a major, major problem for the Harris campaign, and it's especially true among young men. That's kind of the new thing. And I think, you and I talked about this, several months ago, and I'm still going to say that I'm right about this, and I will be proven right. But we talked about young voters, and I said that there was no way that Kamala Harris was going to get the same percentage of young voters that Joe Biden got in 2020. Well, as of right now, she has a 12-point lead on Donald Trump with young voters being under 35. That is 9 points below where Joe Biden was 4 years ago. 9 points is a big gap. That's a huge drop in young voters, and it's almost exclusively in men. It is young men that are turning away from the Democratic Party, and that, I think, leads us into kind of another discussion, which is, why is there such a gender gap in society?
I can tell you right now that the Trump campaign has specifically been doing that outreach for the young male vote. I want to say within the past 6 months now, Trump has appeared on Aiden Ross's streaming channel, done interviews with Logan Paul, done interviews with Theo Vaughn, all these young, very, very popular machismo men, right? People who are popular in those communities, who exude masculinity, traditional masculinity, and endorse those ideas and those philosophies. And he's very popular on those. And for some reason, Trump is somehow a lot more competent speaking with those individuals on TikTok, on Twitch, or on whatever, than he even is doing the more traditional, town halls and debates, traditional interviews with mainstream media. And I can't help but think that this has a huge influence on that current surge in Trump popularity, especially among the young men. His campaign is doing a good job at reaching a very specific niche, which he is pulling from. And as much as the Harris campaign does have outreach as well on platforms such as TikTok, on YouTube, etc., it doesn't quite hit the niche like the Trump campaign has been doing, right? They're tackling a very specific niche, which is proving to be a little bit more successful in a way, right? And I think, and again, this doesn't speak to the grander question, which I think we want to get into in a bit here, over why there's this huge gender gap. But I definitely can say that this is certainly a big reason why, at least in this election, we see that the Trump campaign has pulled a lot of that vote away and has kind of retained a strong young male presence in their voting base.
Yeah, I think you make great points there. Really insightful points there about kind of how well they have tapped into, and specifically in minority communities. If you look at Black men and you look at Latino men across the country, Harris is losing significant ground with both of those groups. And this has been a trend that has been going in one direction for a while, but it has accelerated over the last couple of years. Yes, she pulled back some of those voters from Biden. We should be clear that Biden in 2024 was doing significantly worse than Harris in all of these categories. So she has pulled back some of that, but it has been enough to pull her back to roughly even in a lot of these states in the polling. But even, as I said, is not going to cut it. She needs to be 2 to 3 points ahead in all of these state polls if she wants to win because of the Trump effect. There's going to be a set number of voters that are going to show up that we don't anticipate as pollsters. You can't, even with making changes, you can't anticipate as pollsters how many of these people are going to show up in rural communities who don't vote in any other election. They certainly won't answer a call from a pollster. Some of them are completely off the grid in a lot of ways. Now, in terms of the gender gap, I think you're absolutely right. I think the Trump campaign has done a strong job of appealing to these people. I think that a lot of that is just scare tactics in many ways about other people. I think that Kamala Harris being a female candidate and potentially the first female president and a woman of color doesn't help her with certain groups of people. But I also think that the Democratic Party in general has not done a good enough job of showing young men that they care about them. And I know that there's going to be people who are going to hear this who are immediately going to be saying, oh, you're attacking feminists or something like that. That's not what I'm doing. And to be clear, someone I was that I am very close with, when I brought this up to them a couple months ago, their first initial reaction was to basically defend feminism and feminists when I had never mentioned the term. And we got to the end of the discussion and kind of worked through that. But I had to, be a little bit on the defensive just to bring up the idea that the Democratic Party needs to do more to outreach to men and specifically young men. Young men are in a state of crisis in this country. And I know that doesn't take away from male privilege. Like, this is not like, oh, we're not acknowledging that men have privilege. That's not what this is. But when you look at young men, they're doing worse academically. They're going to college at significantly lower rates. As such, they're not getting employed. They're not making nearly as much money as they used to. And you're also seeing significantly higher suicide rates among young men than any of the other demographics. Young men have the highest suicide rate. And of course, when we look at the violence that exists in so many of these school shootings and mass shootings, it is young men who are carrying out these acts of violence regularly across, and it is not just, for the record, it is not just one racial demographic either. It is kind of across the board, though certainly more heavily in Caucasian men for racially incentivized or racially motivated killings. But young men are in a crisis, and what I hear from a lot of moms that I talk to, they are not worried about their daughters. They're worried about their sons. They are worried that their sons don't have kind of the motivation to keep moving up in the world. And there's challenges, just at the college level. Just look at it from a dating pool perspective. Women, historically and to this day, they don't want to date down. And this is not a we're getting into some sort of traditional gender ideology or whatnot. I'm talking about, in general, women with a college degree don't want to date someone who doesn't have a college degree. And you can't really blame them for that. And so when there are so many more women getting college degrees than men getting college degrees, then what does it do? It stokes resentment in all of these men who are not going to college. And it stokes resentment against academics. It stokes resentment against female academics, intelligent women, because they believe like, oh, you think you're too good for me. And then they go out and turn into the incels. Now, that's not everyone. Of course, it's not everyone, but it is an increasing number of people in our society that is troubling, and it needs to be addressed. There needs to be economic plans that are targeted towards how can we assist young men right now, specifically young men without college degrees. How can we get them to be in a stable position in which they can have families on a more consistent basis, that they can, be better partners on a more consistent basis, and that they can be, kind of thriving members of society on a more consistent basis, which will, of course, limit the mental health struggles. It will limit the resentment. And right now, the only people that they feel are speaking to them are far-right extremists who are doing it for the wrong reasons. They're trying to speak to young men to get them angry at everyone else, to get them to hate women, to get them to hate people of color, whatever it is, to get them to feel like they are victims of a society that is slipping through their hands. And it should be just made clear that, civil rights did not hurt white people. LGBTQ rights did not hurt heteronormative relationships. Empowering women does not weaken men. And as such, helping men will not hurt women. This is not we need to get rid of policies that are empowering women and enfranchising women. You don't help lift somebody up by pulling someone else down. That's not what we do as liberals. That's not historically what the policies have ever done. But if we don't actively start trying to talk to these people, instead of just kind of casting a shadow on them as if, these are the troublemakers in our society, men suck. If we don't actually start trying to reach out to them, we're going to lose them, and we're already seeing it. We're going to lose them to far-right extremist conspiracy theorists, and that is a central tenet of feminism. Feminism is not just about uplifting women, it is also about uplifting men as well. If you look at the central tenets of what feminism is, and there are plenty of feminists who are practicing that. But at the same time, I don't think that gets talked about nearly as much. And politically, right now, in the Democratic Party, it is not an easy thing to say, I want to work to help men. That's not politically an extremely beneficial strategy for winning elections in primaries right now, because it's getting associated with the far right and the way that they talk about masculinity. And so I think that's a significant challenge. I'm interested to hear if you agree or disagree.
I agree and I disagree for a few reasons here. Yes, you are right about there being a very big issue in this country with the way we handle male mental health. In this country, that there is a very large part of the country that, for the better part, ignores and remains ignorant of the increasing issues with male mental health. Now, not to say it's not being ignored. I think in a lot of ways it's getting a lot better. We see a lot of programs coming out like BetterHelp, that explicitly aimed towards, telling men, specifically men, to seek therapy, to be concerned, to accept your feelings, be concerned about yourself. And I think they're great starting points for the greater conversation of male mental health. But you're right, going back to kind of the point of politics, is that it's not a sexy policy to have, but it's also a very easy thing for Republicans to do, to talk about. And I want to go back for just a second to what I was mentioning earlier about Trump and the Trump campaign reaching out to young men. And you look at what he does to rile up this specific base. It's not a lot, because it doesn't take a lot. It's easy. One of the highest viewed videos of interviews and videos with male influencers was a face-off, like a boxing face-off with Logan Paul. It was the simplest thing. I mean, I thought it was freaking cool. Like, it's such a basic thing. It's such an easy thing to do, and it's not something you see on the other side of the aisle. Trump goes to UFC events all the time, and I love MMA, and I will see that dude like every other event, going there, and all he does is wave, but people go nuts. It's these small things that he does to tap into this market, and he's not saying anything, he's not promoting anything, he's just being there. It's such small actions that take a very large effect right? When you go back to polling and demographic appeal. But I feel like Democrats, instead of doing something similar or trying to reach out to people, to certain demographics to help them politically, they've actually pushed them away. As much as you're correct about a lot of, the tenets that are central to feminism and to these movements about supporting everybody, that's not what you hear about on television. That's not what you see on social media. It's not even what politicians talk about on the left. They don't talk about how men and women should both be supported. They talk about how women should be supported. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That's a very good thing. They should continue to support women. Everyone should support women. But you're saying that feminism supports both. And yes, on paper it does. But in practice, specifically in practice, when utilized by politicians, especially on the left, it is not that way. On camera, the left does not care about men. They go out of their way to villainize them. Why are men doing this? Why are men doing that? Why are men have the highest concentration of crime in this country? It's the wrong question to be concerned about, right?
Yeah, the question is, how do we solve it? The question is not who is to blame. We all can recognize that toxic masculinity has caused an innumerable amount of problems in our society. And toxic masculinity has created gigantic problems that exist and has led to the oppression of women. It has led to, just the last couple of years, taking away rights over their own bodies. It has led to kind of archaic, insane laws. We can all agree on that. But how do you address it? How do you prevent men from being toxically masculine? Is it really just by calling them out? Because that, and again, this is where the difference between what is feminism versus how is it being applied in a public sphere, that is not especially productive. The idea is, in my estimation, how do you get a guy to be less toxically masculine? One, it starts very young, but also provide a pathway to a sustainable, stable life in which they can feel good about themselves. And don't make them feel like they're villains just based on who they are and the way they act growing up and the society that they've been born into. We have to be able to nurture them in a way that's effective. And so, yes, you mentioned therapy. Therapy is fantastic and should be available to everyone. And certainly men's mental health is a major problem that hasn't been addressed in that way. And we need to take away the stigma of men's mental health as if that's somehow weakness or feminine, because that is toxic masculinity. But if we really want to make a difference on a political level in terms of closing this gender gap and not losing people to the far right, you have to offer them something that is significant and substantive more than just therapy. You have to offer a life pathway to having a stable job, stable income, and as such being able to find a good partner and create a family. For so many of these people, that's what they really need to be stable, because women make men better. Men are better when they have a partner. And I should say, in general, that goes across the board. You also want non-heteronormative marriages. You want people to be able, in general, to have a partner to better them. And so mental health, important, all of this. But we have to be putting forth policies that show men throughout the country, and especially young men, that they are valued, that we're not just taking them for granted and we don't look at them as villains. The problem is when you say that right now, there's a certain small section of the far left that makes you out as if you are a raging misogynist, or you are part of the patriarchy, or you are part of an effort to keep the boot on the necks of women. And
right. I'm glad you say that, because it is an issue on two fronts. I know it's very easy to look at the far right and say, look at where men are flocking to, look at the ideals around this. But look at the far left for a second. The classic memes that the right uses to broadly paint the left, these ultra feminists or whatever that hate men, all these things, yes, they're memes done to death and they're not reflective of an entire party, but there's truth to it. As much as there is a large far right sect, there is a good sized sect on the far left that does hold these beliefs. And
yeah,
it's like a magnet where the two sides, like, they push each other apart, right? It's, the more we paint the right and the left as solely these like ultra far leaning, sides of a coin, we're never going to close that gap, because we need people who probably are lost somewhere in that far section. Like, conservatives need people on the far left to understand what conservatism means, and liberalism needs people on the far right to understand what liberalism means. It is not there is no one side more villainous than the other, because when you talk to them, when you ask them, they're going to say the same thing about the opposite party, right? And they're going to say the far blank is the reason that this country is going to hell.
Yeah.
Right.
And
yes, like, the gender gap, especially in the farthest sections of the political spectrum, are extremely divergent. But I would definitely wager that the largest gender gap is in these far extremes of the political spectrum. And instead of, being scared of like losing people, we need to reimagine what our political spectrum is like. We need to understand that, that there is a place across the spectrum for anybody, and how you grow up, how you live your life can fit anywhere on that spectrum. And yes, for the left of center individuals, it is about reaching out to primarily men and saying, hey, there is a place for you here. We do not ignore you. We do not believe that women are superior or anything like that you might hear on far right echo chambers. We are just another way of seeing things, but it's not gender exclusive. And, right of center people, and there are plenty of good and honest people right of center that probably would like to see the same thing from the left-leaning sides of the country. I am positive that there are people right of center, the people truly in that larger group of just true and honest conservatives who are like, man, it'd be great if women and, non-cisgender males would see conservatism in a different light than what our far extreme side paints us out to be, because we could really benefit from a more inclusive group of voters. Again, on both sides, like, they both want this, and we really have to move towards a point in time where this is okay.
And yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, this is about kind of bridging the gaps, and it's the same thing that I've always said. The majority of the people in the country are somewhere between these two. I really do believe that these are fringe kind of components on either side of the political spectrum, but they are very loud and vocal, and they make up a majority. They kind of paint broad strokes about all of us. And as you said, people who are right of center, a lot of them, I'm friends with many of them who don't want anything to do with MAGA. They don't want to be associated with the MAGA far right. And there's plenty of people left of center that don't want anything to do with the Squad and Bernie Sanders and the label of woke, whatever that means. And there is kind of a central kind of thing in the middle that are people that you can reach out to. You can reach out to them, and you don't have to label everyone who disagrees with you as the enemy. There's going to be plenty of people who listen to this, and they're going to disagree with things that we say. They're going to say, look, this is, two men talking about men, of course. And that's fair. I can take that. And also, I do want to take a moment to clarify, we talk about the extremes. I don't think that they are the same. I don't think they're the same level of danger. Yes, I think that the far left says silly things quite frequently, says things that seem illogical and impractical to the average person. I agree with many of their policy ideas and have always considered myself a true liberal. The far right is breeding people who end up being violent and do things like attacking the Capitol. So, they're not the same in that way. But we're talking about the people in the middle, the large portion of people in the middle that you don't want to push away. No one's asking, somebody like AOC to go talk to a white supremacist and try and bring them into her camp. That's not what anyone would advise you to do. But don't write off everyone who is, a centrist or a right of center person as the enemy because they disagree with you on a few issues. Don't just lump them all young men, because they play sports as if they're toxically masculine. We can't keep doing that, because we're going to lose a significant portion of people. And as we have seen, young men who are angry are dangerous. They are dangerous to our society, especially when we have this number of guns in our society. And so we have to start addressing the reasons why they're angry and actually speaking to that. And don't give them easy, an easy villain, and don't make them feel like you think they're the villain. So that's our soapbox here today, and I appreciate the insights that you provided. And of course, if you listeners have thoughts on this, we would love to hear what you think about this issue. Where are we wrong? Are we playing into the patriarchy? What are we doing? We want to hear.
If people hear this and don't have thoughts, I'll be very
concerned. I suspect we're going to get plenty of feedback about this, and we will listen, and we will grow because we are human beings, and that's what we do. And so we're going to continue to have civil discussions about this and continue to try and grow and learn. But with that being said, let's move to some things we can all agree on. Tyler, do you want to start for us?
Yeah, I'll start. I'll give you a chance to breathe here from your monologue. But I'm going to start with something that I think everyone hates, and that is mobile game ads on social media. And if you've ever watched a YouTube video or scrolled through Instagram or TikTok, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Those ads that seem like they're one thing, but you might download them thinking it's a game and it's something completely different. They pull the old bamboozle on you. I'm not going to mention names here because I don't want to be sponsored by these damn things. But aren't they the worst? First off, I see them all the time. They have so much money to market, and I can only imagine it's because so many people click on these ads expecting one thing and getting something different. Most are like these videos of fake gameplay. They entice you to download a game thinking it's some interesting premise, and of course it's not that at all, right? They will have promotions by famous online, content creators or YouTubers. Sometimes they have actors. I mean, I swear, 2 days ago, I saw one of these mobile game ads playing before YouTube video, and it was starring Antony Starr, which is, a big actor now. He's Homelander and The Boys. He's great, fantastic actor. I was almost disappointed to see him, in one of these things. I mean, they must have paid him a ton of money, but it's all fake, and he knows it's all fake. But I don't understand how they can have so much money to do this. So clearly it's working, but come on, it's inappropriate. I've seen some that can be borderline pornographic in the kind of imagery that they're showing, especially the ones on TikTok and Instagram. And I'm like, come on now. Children are here, young, impressionable people scroll through these social medias. Do you have no shame, mobile game ad companies? Truly? That's my soapbox, mobile game ads. Screw you guys. Y'all suck. I wish, Vice President Harris, you should promote legislation that bans that crap because not okay.
I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more. I mean, they're so annoying. It is interesting how many random actors. It's like, if you know me, you know that I love playing games, but I don't know you. Some of them,
yeah, right?
Some of these people, these B and C level actors, have to be I'm so and so from this, and this. These 4 random things that that you would have to specifically know. So
you might remember me from Jaws 3D,
and I really care about King Robert and saving the king. You know what that one is. Everyone knows what that one is. We all see it. And the games are never what they say they are. That's so, that's infuriating. And also, if you go on the comments for a lot of these videos, these reels and whatnot, you'll see not real game, highly disappointed, feel like I was gypped, whatever it is. They're terrible. But so for once, you're on the side of something negative. I'm going to talk about something positive I think we should all agree on, which is that movie theaters are good for the country. And that I really hope that movie theaters don't die. And I believe this for a variety of reasons, but most importantly, in an era in which we are so isolated as a society, as a people, we are so isolated, we're off in all sorts of, in our own kind of worlds, we spend so much time on social media rather than around each other. The world has allowed us, via technology, to be more isolated and separate from one another on a more consistent basis. There are so few things that we collectively experience together. Sports is one of those things. Concerts are another one of those things. But both of those two things have also been taken over by phones. If you go to sports games, there's people who are actively, filming the game. You're at the game. Stop filming the game. If you're at the concerts, everyone knows at the concerts, they've tried desperately to stop this. It's like the whole crowd is up there with their phones filming. This is problematic for a variety of reasons. We can talk about the social media aspect of it, but movies, very rarely do you have somebody in a theater who's filming the movie. Collective communal experiences in which we share moments and we experience something together at the same time. Not where I streamed it and watched it on my own and then talk about it later, but we're at different periods in the show, all of that. Moments where we can go experience something at the same time and come out of it and we can laugh. You can be around an audience and hear what they laugh at and you can laugh too. And those are things that we have so few opportunities to do anymore, and movie theaters are the still relatively affordable way of doing that. And we need to do everything we can to make sure that movie theaters survive. So I understand if you like watching things when it comes to streaming. I get that. I'm not going to say you're wrong or anything along those lines. But I am going to encourage you, if you can. This year we've got Gladiator and Wicked coming out on the same day. Glicked, I think, is what they're trying to call it. Go out and see a movie this holiday season. Go support theaters. They employ people. The artists have put in, there's thousands and thousands of artists that go into every film. Support those artists and support the storytelling, because if we continue to let streaming take over our entire lives and remove us from any communal experiences, then how can we expect to fully reunite the states? So with that, I think that's our podcast for this week. Thank you so much for listening. Please follow us. You can follow us and get the podcasts on whatever your favorite podcast source is. From Manchester, New Hampshire, I am Jesse Saywell.
And from Los Angeles, California, my name is Tyler Ehrig, and this has been Reunited States. See you guys next week.